Welcome to Face, connecting theater makers to the public, brought to you by legacytheaterct.org.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Face to Face. My name is Stiefel Williams, and it is my pleasure to be doing today's interview. It's my first interview that I've conducted, but it is with somebody who's very special to me. Paul Elkin is a musical theater veteran with Broadway credits that had him singing, dancing, and acting with luminaries of the stage and screen like Ann Miller, Mickey Rooney, Lauren Bacall, Chita Rivera, and Imogene Coca. He has performed in nightclubs and at casinos, both as a solo artist and also alongside people that you may have heard of, like Sammy Davis Jr., Joan Rivers, Ben Vereen, and Jennifer Holliday. After years of performing, Paul transitioned to the role of teacher and voice coach, where he has utilized his training in the Italian style of bel canto singing and his understanding of the mechanics of the instrument of the human voice is just invaluable when he trains singers of all levels, styles, and ages. His students include a list of Broadway performers too numerous to mention. Film and TV stars, opera professionals, pageant contestants, and regular folk who just have a passion for singing. Paul has been my voice teacher for over 30 years. That's a terrifying number. And he has been one of my dearest, dearest friends for that long as well. So when Face to Face decided to interview him, I jumped at the chance to do it. So please welcome Paul Elkin. Hi, honey.
Hi, Steph. How you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for doing this with us today. This is going to be a very strange thing for us to be speaking conversationally in such a serious and professional manner, because we normally laugh all the time.
It never happens.
So welcome. And let's just start off with the obvious, the beginning. You're a New Haven boy, correct?
Yes. Yes.
So tell us where you began as far as performing. Did you have lessons or dance, voice? How did that work?
When I was 7 years old, I decided I wanted to play the piano. My mom played the piano, and I thought that would be just a fabulous way to live your life with music around you. So I started taking with a woman, Dorothy Marquette, in West Haven, Connecticut, your hometown.
My hometown.
And I studied piano through my grammar school, junior high school years, and then I started doing musical theater. And then my love switched from being a pianist to being a singer and an actor and a dancer. So I started voice lessons with the maestro Francesco Riggio, who did all the operas at the Schubert Theater, and he and his wife, Hilda Riggio, ran the Connecticut Experimental Theater. A lot of people came out of there. One notable one would be June Anderson, who ended up at the Metropolitan Opera, and myself went on to Broadway. Through my high school years, I also studied acting with Constance Welch, who started the Yale Acting School, and her expertise was Shakespeare. And so I studied privately with her since around the age of 14 I started. And as well as doing that with her, I would travel into New York and study with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio. And back then, going into New York at 14 years old was not considered an unsafe thing to do. And my parents used to just take me down to the train station and off I'd go, and I'd spend the day in New York City doing dance classes and acting. And then when I went to college, I went to Boston Conservatory of Music as an opera major. And I decided midway that I wanted to go into musical theater, and I switched my degree to Southern Connecticut University, and I minored in music at that point, and majored in theater and speech also as a minor, so I had a double minor. And then off to New York I went and had my first Broadway show audition, which was Whoopee, which started at Goodspeed Opera House, and then off to Broadway with that. Following that, I ended up landing Sugar Babies with Ann Miller and Mickey Rooney, and then Woman of the Year with Lauren Bacall, Chicago with Chita Rivera. I did some of them on Broadway and tour, some just Broadway, some just tour. Uh, but it was very exciting and wonderful career.
Well, it's just fascinating. And I learned something I didn't know about the Lee Strasberg connection. So that's fascinating. And so you kind of did the whole move to New York, be a bartender while trying to make it type
Yes.
thing, didn't you?
Yes, yes. I used to work for a catering service. Uh, Back then, what you did was you tried to find jobs that you could do part time between gigs. And I would always go and do the ships out of South Street Seaport on the weekends when I wasn't working, and make some good pocket money, which would pay the rent and keep you in your classes, your voice lessons, your dance lessons, your acting lessons, buy your wardrobe that you needed for auditions. It's interesting what you're willing to do when there's nothing else you want to do with your life.
Yeah, I was going to say that that really shows a level of determination that you could have done other things. You could have gotten a job doing something that paid better or that was more reliable, something more predictable. But it's one of those things that when you love to perform and you have a passion for performing, you're going to find a way to do it, and everything else is just a means to an end.
Absolutely. And I think the main thing for my generation was my teachers, the maestro and Hilda Riggio, they didn't encourage myself to do this. Um, they were more, they wanted you to take the safer route, become a doctor, become a lawyer, whatever. But I was so determined to do it that there was no question in my mind that this is what I had to do with my life at that time. I look back now and I think that sometimes ignorance is bliss. And I look at all the things that places I had to live, jobs that I took jobs selling toys for Parker Brothers. Just all these little things you do just so that you can afford a little hole in the wall in Hell's Kitchen. My first apartment had the lock was missing, and it was in Hell's Kitchen, which was not a great area back then. Now it's been revitalized, but I remember when I got the apartment, it was like $100 a month, believe it or not. And I walked in, and the lock was missing, and there was a big hole, and the tub was in the middle of the living room, right in front of the hole. So that was my first apartment in New York City, and I lived there for about 6 months. And I remember stuffing rags in the hole. So
An actor's life for me.
there you go. There you go. Exactly.
So I imagine that taught you a lot about yourself and about your ability to survive and your spirit of determination and things like that. And I think that that's a really important thing for people to understand, that it seems like acting is just such a fun, wonderful thing, and it is. It's a wonderful way to express
Yes.
yourself, but you learn a lot about yourself by what you're willing to do.
Yeah, and I think that one of the hardest things about the business is there's always rejection, but that's part of the business, and that's how you have to look at it. You can't look at it you can't take it so personally, even though it is, because you are the product. But it really is part of the business, and you get things and you don't get things. That's just how it works, and you learn to let that roll off your back and just keep pushing forward. You got to keep your eye on the prize, and if you can make your living in this business and work consistently, you're a success.
Well, that's a very important aspect of the whole business, that there is rejection every day.
Mhm.
And then there are times when you get performances where people are pleased and proud and you get standing ovations. And there are other times when people just aren't so impressed and you don't even get the job.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that a lot of people don't realize, especially with the way the business is now, with all of the TV channels and all the shows that are on TV and movies and all the different aspects of earning a living in the theatrical community, people can earn their living of huge amounts of money being a hand model. Um, and it's the truth. I have friends that actually raised their kids, put them through college, and that's what he did. He was a hand model, a
Wow.
very successful one. But it is a way. There's so many ways to earn money in this business now that people don't even think about.
True. So, Paul, you are what is referred to in the biz as a triple threat. You are proficient and talented in dance, in singing, in acting, and that's pretty rare to be able to do that and then to be able to make a living at it as you did. But I would like to say that you're a quadruple threat because you also have this fabulous ability to teach voice and to be able to share technique and ideas with people who are trying to learn it. And I think a lot of people think that if you can sing, well, then you must be able to teach. And I can sing. I wouldn't even know where to begin to teach someone. So can you talk a little bit about what's important to be able to take with you being a performer and then becoming a teacher?
Well, teaching's not for everybody. It definitely has to be a labor of love. I never taught because I couldn't perform. I decided to become a full-time teacher when I was doing Woman of the Year with Lauren Bacall. And I made the decision at that point to stop performing and switch hats. People who teach just to make a living, it's got to be in your genes to really want to be in that process, because it's not about you anymore. When I went to Boston Conservatory, I had the pleasure of playing, because of my piano background, for many of the voice teachers there as a substitute pianist. A lot of the voice teachers didn't play the piano, so I would step in and be the accompanist. So I got to observe a lot of different teachers at the conservatory when I was there. When I left the conservatory, I had friends of mine that were in the shows with me who would say, could you help me with a song? Little by little over the years, I ended up having a dozen students or so in New York that were professional Broadway people. So I didn't start teaching beginners. I started the opposite way. I started teaching Broadway people. And then when I moved to Connecticut, I started teaching more younger beginning students. So that really taught me how to teach the professional. And I had to kind of modify that a little bit when I became a teacher in Connecticut, because all of a sudden I was teaching people from the ground up instead of from the top down. So it is a very different approach when you're building a voice, as opposed to just coaching a voice that's already been established by a professional singer. I think that the thing that has helped me the most probably is that I've studied with many different teachers in my life, and I don't teach people to sing the way that I sing because I have a lot to pull from. And I think that's also important. I think that people who make the better teachers are teachers that have learned to sing and developed their voice, as opposed to someone who's born with a gifted instrument and that's all they have. Because a lot of times when people are just so gifted that things come naturally to them, a lot of times they don't really know how they got there. It just was there. If that makes any sense to you.
Absolutely, sure.
And then there are other people who learn to do all of that stuff. They develop it. It's amazing how a nice instrument can become pretty extraordinary. And an extraordinary instrument can be also ruined, on the other hand. I've seen it go both ways with people and fellow performers.
That brings up an interesting point. As I said in my introduction, I've been studying with you since 1988. And
makes me feel old.
Yeah, it makes me feel old too. So there we go. But one of the things that I had studied with other voice teachers before, and one of the things that really worked for me with you, and why one of the reasons we clicked for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons was that you were able to take sometimes abstract ideas and figure out a way to communicate to me how to take those abstract ideas and make them work for my voice. And it's not the same teaching a classical singer as a pop singer, as a musical theater person. It's not the same teaching a woman or teaching a man, but you're always able to adjust to your students and to figure out ways to make it click for them. And it always did for me. Sometimes it would just be silly images like, well, pretend you have hot potatoes in your mouth when you're doing it.
Right, 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 right.
Or that you have a hole in the top of your head and you're trying to shoot the air through that. That might not work for one student. It worked for me a lot. But if it didn't work for one student, you'd figure out a way to make it make sense for them. So that's super important. And also understanding the mechanics of the voice and how the vocal cords work and everything like that. I think that is kind of speaks to what you were saying about not ruining a good instrument.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. It's an interesting profession if you really do a lot of reading and working with different people, as I said before. I believe, if I remember correctly, there's 200 some odd ligaments and muscles that make up the laryngeal system. Okay. And if you think about that, that's pretty amazing that we learn to control this through imagery, a lot of it through imagery. I find that you can manipulate a little bit physically, but I find that the best way is if you have sense memory, sensation, imagery. When I was at the Medical University of South Carolina, I took a course called Medicine and the Vocal Arts. And it was interesting listening to the speech therapists and the doctors meet with us voice teachers. And a lot of the stuff we would talk about, they would be like, how do you do that? What does that mean? When they would actually talk about the scientific, the hyoid bone, which is the tongue, which hooks to the larynx, tongue, hyoid bone, larynx, they would talk about all that physical stuff, which is really difficult to produce a artistically beautiful sound if you're trying to control your hyoid bone. That's just crazy stuff, it exists, it is there, they understand it. But a lot of times when you start to talk about mask placement, tinges of nasality, the oral pharynx, the main resonator, things like that, when you point around, most intuitive singers with a good musical aptitude can find their way with that. And little things, imagery to me is the way I was taught by the bel canto school. And I find that to be the most efficient for me and the least manipulative. I find that if it's too much manipulation, I think you can cause damage and problems to the voice. Too much tension gets into it.
Paul, about the bel canto school, what does that mean? What is bel canto singing, and why is it important to use even if you're not a classical singer?
Well, bel canto really only just means beautiful singing. That's what it means. I think that when the bel canto school, you have the 5 vowels in Italian. They're pure vowels. Some of our greatest composers are the Italian composers. And I think that when you teach that Italian method where you are on these pure vowels, it's easier to have less craziness going on in the throat. English is one of the hardest languages to sing in. We have all of the diphthongs. And I always, when I work in English, I either Italianize it or I make it a little bit more British, sort of neutralize it and get the vowels to line up a little bit better. Italian, like I said, is the best language for that, and that's what they're known for. If you go to other languages like the German and the French is wonderful because you have this almost natural masky nasality in the sound when you speak, which of course, once again, you Italianize French to get it so that it's not so nasal when you sing French opera. And the same thing with German. I cannot tell you how many teachers, when I studied the German repertoire, that they would say to me, Italianize, Italianize, Italianize. It's too guttural. It's too dark, too far back in the throat. Larynx is pressed too low. So it's all these little things you learn along the way that you bring to the table as a voice teacher.
So even if you're not singing a classical repertoire, it's important to understand.
Yes, and as far as the Italian thing goes, bel canto, almost every teacher of every language goes back to that as their role, the model of ideal vocal production. Italianize. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard people say to Italianize and think Italian.
Sometimes I hear a rock singer or a pop singer and I can tell that they've studied classically. Even if it doesn't sound at all like a classical sound, you can tell by the way they approach their notes and attack their singing that they know how to not hurt their voice.
Yes, well, because when you actually study technique, You're working on the highs, the lows, the fast, the slows, the louds, the softs. That's really all. That's the whole ball of wax there. And there is nowhere else other than the classical school of singing that you actually use your whole body as an amplifier. When you are in musical theater, nightclub, you're usually mic'd now, especially nowadays. Almost everything is mic'd.
Yeah.
So,
So you teach, you've taught for many years, and now there's a pandemic. So how do you continue to teach voice where you're, breathing in the other person's direction? How does that work? What did you have to do to adapt?
number one, buy a new computer. Number one, buy a new computer. Mic system. I put a bass underneath it. It totally changed everything I do in teaching as far as not having the student here one-on-one. You can't touch them. Your everything is very focused this way, and in some ways more focused, I think, because we're right in each other's face.
Right.
Sound was the hardest thing. That's why I said I had to add the mics, the bass. Because at first, when I did it with just the computer, it was distorted. It sounded tinny. It sounded a little bit hollow. The first 2 months of the pandemic, I refused to teach because I said, this is just not going to work. Because I remember the old Skype. And it just, the lags, how do you do that with music? You really can't. Not to mention the fact that the sound isn't necessarily true.
Right.
But once I upgraded everything, after a couple of months, realizing that I wasn't going to be able to teach for even longer if I didn't figure out how to do this, I found it actually it's become very efficient. And all of my students actually save the time of driving, which is...
I love it.
I know. Well, you're in Guilford, I'm in Norwalk. So,
Right.
yeah, so they all love the fact that they can just walk into their bedroom and click on the computer and take their voice lesson. I have found that because I play the piano, I've learned to just record everything as we go, either before the lesson, during the lesson, or after the lesson. I send it to the student and we run it. That's the biggest drawback, I think, is that they have to have the music on their side. Otherwise, it's out of sync. So every now and then I'll run into an issue, like if someone's doing aria with classical cadenzas, difficult phrasing. Sometimes that's hard because you're trying to show them on one end with the piano, and they want to sing it with you, and they have to do it a cappella, or I have to record it and send it, one or the other. Right. So that sometimes makes the lesson a little bit awkward. But no, actually it's worked out quite well, and I find that it's almost more intense because everything seems magnified from the screen and from the sound. And in some ways, I think even more accurate.
Well, it certainly works for me to be able to sing with you virtually because you are a good hour's drive from me. And, we haven't had lessons in a long time until I, said a few months ago, I'm getting out of shape. I got to go back to Paul. So.
Well, and the other interesting thing about Zoom is, I don't know if other teachers notice this or not, but I find that some of the negative things, the flaws, the things that aren't quite as accurate as they could be in the voice, they get magnified on Zoom. And I don't know if everyone that teaches voice notices that, but I do. And I think that in that way, a pitch, for example, has to be so on the money. Otherwise, it seems to pick up the bad things more than the good things.
Right.
Makes sense.
So I think that one of the things that the pandemic has taught everyone is that the arts are important in people's lives. And you didn't realize it perhaps until you weren't able to sing, you weren't able to go to a movie, you weren't able to enjoy performances outside your home. And that's one of the things that we look forward to emphasizing at Legacy. But I think that it's important for people to realize that even if it's not your profession, it's something that is still fulfilling. Now, in your family, I know that you come from a large family, a musical family. Your sister Sandy is a fabulous coloratura soprano, and I've performed with her, but she just does things mostly locally, and she's a hospital administrator as a profession. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have your distant cousin, Michael Bolton, that you grew up with. and he was
And his name was Beloten, not Bolton.
Logan.
Beloten, Michael Beloten. Yeah, we
You
lived.
heard it here first, folks.
Yes, we lived across the street from each other, and we were in the same class. We'd walk to Beecher School together in New Haven,
Mhm.
and most people don't realize his name was Beloten, not Bolton.
I didn't.
Oh.
But there you are in your family. You have people pursuing, the more pop music. You have people pursuing Broadway, theater, and opera. You have people who just do it for the love of singing and have different types of careers. And that's what, being involved in the arts is all about. It's having an outlet.
Sure.
And that's one of the things that's great about being able to study voice with you, because even if you're not performing regularly or you never perform, it's just being able to work your instrument.
Well, my sister's worked at Yale, Sandy, for 30 years, and she's actually more of a lyric soprano, but she does do some coloratura work. That's why I think you think of her that way.
I do,
yeah, but she does do quite a bit of that, but she's more of a lyric. But she has always said to me that she works at Yale and she keeps her singing going because she wants to eat. That's what she always says. She says, "I like to eat,"
Yeah.
Because it's not a predictable business. So I think most people that take voice lessons, especially in Connecticut, they are either a very serious church singer or a music teacher, or they just love to sing for fun. Most of them, I find, the majority are pursuing it. You get a handful that pursue it professionally. But music is such a healthy outlet.
Oh yeah.
For everybody.
Yeah.
Whatever level you're looking at, at. So.
Yeah.
I would agree with you that most people that do it are doing it for their enjoyment.
Yeah. And you get to sing in your everyday life when you're singing, with and for your students, and in other outlets as well. Do you miss performing 8 shows a week?
That part of it, I do miss that. I do not miss the auditions and the callbacks and the waiting in Central Park, because I have a callback in 2 hours and not enough time to get back to my apartment. So you sit outside, or if it's raining, you got to go sit in a diner somewhere. I don't miss all of that, because that's the stuff that I know you've experienced, because you auditioned in New York quite a bit. And when they say pounding the pavement, that's truly what it is, and that's never changed. I would say the thing about the business now that's changed since I was doing it is more people pursue it professionally because their families, parents, are more enthusiastic over the idea of it for their children and more supportive of it. I think when my generation, it was something that someone else's kids did.
Mm-hmm.
Most people didn't ever encourage their kids to go into the business. So I think in one way it's more competitive now even. Not that it wasn't competitive when I did it, but
sure.
I think it's more now.
Yeah.
I remember back then, if I went to a call with 800 guys competing for one role, I think that same call today would probably be 2,000, 8,000. From what my students have told me about how busy it gets in New York City at Actors Equity.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just multiplied in that way, the competitive way. But then on the other hand, there's more opportunity nowadays.
Yeah. Well, like you said, and you can always be a hand model, but not me. So, Paul, your studio now is in Norwalk. If somebody wants to study with you or wants to find out more, what is your website?
Paul Elkin Vocal Studio in Norwalk, Connecticut. Silver Mine, to be exact. It's a historic community in Norwalk. And they could go on the internet and find me, and my contact information is there.
I think that this has been great, and it's been so fun to chat with you. Is there anything you want to make sure we include? Something that your last words?
God bless you. No, this was fun, Steph. A lot of fun.
Yeah,
thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Love you so much. Mwah. Thank you all for joining us on Face to Face. Good night.
Thank you for joining us on Face to Face, connecting theater makers to the public. Thank you to Brad Ross for the themed music. You can follow us on legacytheaterct.org.